Garrett Shaw had always known danger, but he had never faced anything like this. The facility was a labyrinth of metal corridors, glowing panels, and alarms blaring in frantic tones. Sparks flew from damaged consoles, and the distant roar of explosions reverberated through the reinforced walls. He had been sent on a routine security inspection, expecting little more than malfunctioning drones and the occasional restless engineer. But the reality that confronted him was chaos incarnate. Gunfire erupted around the atrium, energy bolts scorching the walls, and scientists scrambled for cover as automated turrets fired indiscriminately. In the center of it all was Sivara Kelahn, the alien scientist he had been assigned to protect, who now froze in panic. Her species was unlike anything he had encountered. Graceful, with elongated limbs and shimmering, iridescent skin that reflected the facility's warning lights. Her eyes, a brilliant gold, widened as she realized the bullets were headed straight for her. Garrett didn't think. His training kicked in, instincts sharper than thought. He dove, slamming into her side, pushing her to the floor, and absorbing the brunt of the gunfire himself. Bolts grazed his armor, sparks showering around them, and one hit slammed into his shoulder, sending him sprawling across the cold, metallic floor. Pain seared through him, sharp and sudden, but he refused to cry out. Every nerve in his body screamed survival. Yet the only thought he clung to was keeping Sivara alive. The cub of bravery he didn't even know existed surged within him. Years of training, of missions and hostile sectors, had taught him precision, speed, and how to think when bullets and lasers were flying past. But nothing could have prepared him for the realization that in saving her, he was challenging everything her species had ever believed about males. Sivara's people had spent 3,000 years convinced that males were incapable of true selflessness, that sacrifice and courage of this kind were beyond them. And here he was, risking his life without hesitation, shattering centuries of ingrained cultural assumptions in one heartbeat. He could feel her trembling against him, a mix of fear and awe. Her tiny hands clutched at his armor, nails scraping lightly against reinforced plating, grounding him in the reality of her presence. Garrett whispered quickly, "Stay down, I've got you," though he was aware she probably didn't understand his words fully. Actions spoke louder anyway, and his shielded form, pressed between her and the gunfire, was proof enough. Around them, sparks erupted from broken conduits, and the acrid smell of burning circuits filled the air. The facility's automated defenses malfunctioned further, creating hazards at every turn. One wrong move, one misstep, and both of them could be lost. And yet, for Garrett, time seemed to slow. He saw not just a target or a duty, but a life, fragile, brilliant, irreplaceable, held in his arms. He pushed through the panic, scanning for threats, calculating angles, and moving with the precision of a man who had trained his entire life for impossible scenarios. In that split second, he understood something profound. Courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was the willingness to act despite it. Every muscle ached, every nerve burned, but the thought of letting her fall was intolerable. Finally, the gunfire ceased, not because the threat had ended, but because the attackers had shifted focus. Distracted by the chaos Garrett's actions had created, he pressed his back against a wall, keeping Sivara low, her golden eyes fixed on him with a mixture of shock and something that might have been gratitude. Garrett's chest heaved, heart hammering. Yet he felt a strange calm beneath the adrenaline, a connection forming in that brief, intense moment. Little did he know that this single act of selflessness would ripple across time, altering not just her perception of males, but the fate of her people, and that days later, she and her people would return with an offer no human could have ever expected. Days had passed since Garrett Shaw had risked everything to shield Sivara Kelahn from certain death, but the memory of her wide golden eyes and the way her slender body had trembled against him haunted every moment. He had expected debriefings, paperwork, maybe even commendations for heroism, but nothing in his experience had prepared him for what awaited. When he returned to the facility, fully healed and ready to resume routine duties, he was met not with empty corridors or curious colleagues, but with a delegation of tall, imposing figures, their presence commanding immediate attention. The air was thick with tension, every figure radiating authority, their posture rigid, their expressions inscrutable. Sivara stood among them, her usual composed demeanor replaced by something far more formidable. She no longer appeared as the vulnerable scientist he had saved, but as a figure of power, a presence that seemed to draw every eye in the room. Her golden eyes met his across the atrium, and Garrett felt a strange mix of awe and disbelief. She spoke first, her voice calm, resonant, yet carrying an authority that seemed to echo through the facility. "Garrett Shaw," she intoned, each syllable deliberate, "your actions have changed the course of our people." He blinked, unsure whether he had heard her correctly. Changed the course of her people. He had shielded her from gunfire. Yes, but the implication of her words sent a shiver down his spine. Around him, the alien delegation whispered among themselves, their tones low and melodic, carrying hints of words he could not understand. There was a weight to their attention, an almost palpable expectation that he comprehend the gravity of what had occurred. Garrett swallowed, feeling his pulse quicken. He had acted without thought, driven purely by instinct and compassion, but apparently, Instinct alone could alter civilizations. Then Sivara stepped forward, and Garrett noticed the glint of ceremonial markings across her armor, symbols of rank and heritage he barely recognized. For 3,000 years, she continued, her gaze never leaving his. Our culture has believed that males are incapable of true selflessness. Your willingness to risk yourself shattered that belief. You demonstrated courage, honor, and a capacity for sacrifice that we never imagined existed in your species. Garrett felt his jaw tighten. Recognition was one thing, but this was unprecedented. He had saved her life, yes, but had he truly changed the course of an entire matriarchal civilization with one impulsive act? Before he could process it, the delegation produced a device, projecting a holographic map of the planet's fractured territories. Our people have been embroiled in civil war for 30 years, Sivara explained, her tone steady but urgent. Your actions have convinced us that a human's perspective, combined with our forces, may finally bring an end to this conflict. We offer you a position unlike any human has held before, to command joint military forces and unite our warring factions. The words left Garrett momentarily speechless. Command, not just soldiers, but an entire alien military, entrusted to a human. The weight of the responsibility pressed against him like the gunfire he had barely survived days ago, and yet, despite the fear, there was something in her eyes, hope, a challenge he could not ignore. As he glanced at the map, his mind began to race with possibilities, calculations, and strategies. The enemy factions were scattered, unpredictable, and deeply entrenched. If he accepted this offer, he would step into a war far beyond anything Earth's militaries had ever faced. But a strange thrill coursed through him. The same instincts that had saved Sivara now whispered that this was more than duty. It was an opportunity to prove humanity's potential, to forge alliances across stars, and to shape history. The delegation waited in silence, their expectation almost suffocating. Garrett's eyes met Sivara's again, and in that moment he understood one undeniable truth. His actions had consequences far larger than he had ever imagined. The proposal before him was not just a test of skill or courage, it was a test of character, of humanity, and of trust. And as he took a steadying breath, he knew that whatever he decided in the next moments would determine the fate of not just her people, but the entire galaxy. The weight of destiny pressed upon him, and outside the atrium, shadows flickered, hinting that danger was never far behind. Garrett Shaw had accepted the proposal, though the weight of the responsibility pressed heavily on his shoulders. Commanding an alien military force was nothing like his experiences as a human marine. This was a culture that had waged war for millennia, guided by strategies, traditions, and tactics that defied earthly logic. And yet, alongside Sivara Kelahn, he began training her warriors in ways they had never imagined. Adaptive tactics, improvisation, and split-second decision-making became their tools, blending human ingenuity with alien discipline. Each day brought victories in simulations, each maneuver a lesson in trust and understanding between two very different species. Sivara observed him closely, golden eyes sharp and calculating, yet softened by the memory of the moment he had shielded her. In private training sessions, she allowed him to challenge conventions, to push the limits of their strategies. Garrett discovered that she was not only brilliant but also fiercely inquisitive, willing to embrace methods that her people had once deemed impossible. And while their forces learned from his guidance, he learned equally from her insight, their alien perspective on tactics. Leadership and loyalty offered nuances he had never considered. Together, they became a force that neither human nor alien had anticipated, but the shadow of danger loomed beyond their training grounds. Reports filtered in from scouts, rogue factions, entrenched warlords, and mysterious movements on the edges of known space. There were whispers of an alien fleet approaching from the outer rim, one that had somehow manipulated the civil war for its own gain. Garrett's instincts flared. This was no ordinary threat. The pieces were moving on a galactic chessboard, and he and Sivara were only beginning to see the shape of the trap. Every day brought new intelligence, each report more ominous than the last, and the realization settled cold in his chest. The war they had been preparing for was only the beginning. Amid the tension of strategy and training, a subtle connection began to form between them. Hours spent planning and fighting side by side fostered an unspoken bond. Sivara's stoic authority sometimes cracked, revealing fleeting smiles, subtle gestures of trust, and moments of vulnerability she rarely shared. Garrett, in turn, found himself noticing more than her tactical brilliance, the curve of her jaw, the determined gleam in her eyes, the quiet laughter that surfaced only when they were alone. The battlefield had become a place of closeness, where mutual respect intertwined with growing attraction, each moment leaving them acutely aware of what was unspoken yet undeniable. One evening, as the twin suns of Sivara's homeworld set behind the mountains visible from the training fields, Garrett and Sivara reviewed fleet movements together. A message flashed across their senses, coded in patterns only she could fully decipher. The approaching alien fleet was not just a distant threat, it had already infiltrated some of their intelligence networks, manipulating battles to weaken their combined forces. Someone, somewhere, had orchestrated decades of civil war to ensure the galaxy remained destabilized. Garrett's pulse quickened. They had trained, strategized, and united armies. Yet an invisible hand had been guiding events toward catastrophe. Sivara's golden eyes met his, steady and unwavering, though he could sense the tension beneath her calm. "We are not just fighting factions within our borders," she said, her voice low, serious. "We are facing a force that has been shaping our history in the shadows. We must act before they strike decisively." Garrett nodded, understanding instantly the stakes. This was no longer a civil war. They were the first line of defense against a far greater threat. His human instincts, combined with her alien insight, would be tested like never before, as they prepared to move their forces and confront this unknown enemy. Garrett couldn't shake the feeling that everything had led to this moment. The act of shielding Sivara had started a chain of events that had drawn him deep into a war spanning stars and centuries. And now, as distant lights flickered on the horizon on the arrival of the alien fleet, he knew the true test was about to begin. The decisions they made in the coming hours would determine not just the fate of the Civil War, but the survival of their worlds. The sky above the facility darkened as the alien fleet emerged from hyperspace, a vast armada that seemed to stretch beyond the horizon. Each ship was sleek, black, and deadly, reflecting the twin suns of the planet like shards of night. Their arrival silenced the training grounds, sending Sivara's warriors into disciplined formations, energy weapons primed and shields raised. Garrett stood beside her, heart hammering, adrenaline surging not from fear, but from the knowledge that the moments he had trained for, the strategies he had devised, and the trust he had built were about to be tested like never before. Sivara's golden eyes scanned the horizon, calculating, predicting, commanding. Her voice, firm and resonant, carried over the assembled forces. "We fight as one. We do not falter. Our strength lies not in domination but in unity, courage, and trust." Garrett felt a strange sense of awe, realizing that the small alien scientist he had once shielded had become a leader, capable of inspiring armies with a single phrase. He adjusted his stance, focusing on the battlefield with the precision of a human marine who had survived countless missions. Improvisation, adaptability, and split-second decision-making would be their edge against a technologically superior enemy. The first wave of enemy assault pods struck, their plasma beams lighting the sky. Sivara led her warriors into action, moving with grace and deadly precision, while Garrett coordinated defensive maneuvers, redirecting energy grids, manipulating automated turrets, and setting traps designed to exploit the fleet's predictable formations. The combination of human ingenuity and alien discipline created chaos in the enemy ranks. Ships collided, systems overloaded, and boarding parties faltered under unexpected countermeasures. Every tactical decision Garrett had made during training now proved critical, and every action from Sivara's forces magnified its impact. But the enemy was relentless. A massive detachment broke through the outer defenses, targeting the facility's central command hub. Garrett's mind raced. If the hub fell, their communications, defenses, and strategy networks would collapse instantly. He glanced at Sivara, who nodded imperceptibly, understanding without words. Together they orchestrated a counterattack. He would lead an infiltration team to disable the enemy ship's core systems from within, while she held the front lines, inspiring her warriors to resist the overwhelming force. It was audacious, dangerous, and perhaps suicidal, but there was no alternative. Inside the flagship, Garrett moved like a shadow, using every trick he had learned from years of survival in hostile environments. Enemy officers and automated defenses fell one by one, each strike precise, each calculation critical. Outside, the battle raged, explosions shaking the ground and illuminating the chaos like a starlit storm. Sivara's leadership was flawless. Her warriors executed complex maneuvers with perfect timing, their trust in Garrett evident in the way they adapted his strategies on the fly. The synergy between human creativity and alien discipline was lethal, turning the tide of the battle inch by inch. Finally, Garrett reached the core, initiating a chain reaction that would destabilize the entire flagship. Alarms blared, lights flickered, and the hull shuddered violently. He barely had time to signal Sivara before the ship erupted in a controlled explosion, crippling the fleet's command structure. Outside, the enemy's remaining vessels scattered, retreating into the void, their momentum shattered. Silence descended over the battlefield, broken only by the cheers and relieved whispers of Sivara's forces. Sivara descended from her command platform, her armor battered but radiant, and stepped beside Garrett. Her golden eyes, glowing with triumph and gratitude, met his. "Basilit, you didn't just save me," she said softly, voice carrying across the quieted battlefield. "You saved our people and perhaps the galaxy." Garrett felt a strange warmth spread through him, a mix of relief, awe, and disbelief. The human who had once shielded a fragile alien scientist had become a hero, a leader, and a trusted partner in a war that spanned worlds. As the twin suns set, casting long shadows over the recovering forces, Garrett realized the truth he had always known but never fully appreciated. Courage, compassion, and trust could echo across time and space. Small acts could change destinies, Bonds could transcend species, culture, and war. And sometimes, shielding someone from gunfire could lead to a future no human could have ever expected, a future where alliances were forged, wars ended, and hearts intertwined among the stars. The aftermath of the battle was both surreal and awe-inspiring. Garrett Shaw stood on the scorched observation deck of the facility, overlooking a battlefield littered with the remnants of shattered ships and exhausted warriors. Sivara Kelahn was beside him, her golden eyes reflecting the glow of the setting suns. She no longer appeared as the vulnerable scientist he had shielded days ago. She was regal, commanding, and unyielding, a true leader whose very presence inspired loyalty and courage. Garrett's chest still ached from the fight, his armor scarred and battered, yet he felt an unfamiliar lightness, a sense that everything they had endured had been leading to this moment. The alien fleet, their command structure decimated, had retreated into the void. The surviving enemy forces surrendered, and for the first time in decades, the civil war that had torn Sivara's people apart was coming to an end. Garrett realized the enormity of their achievement. Not only had they survived against overwhelming odds, but they had also united two factions long divided by mistrust and bloodshed. The alien soldiers, once skeptical of his guidance, now looked to him with admiration, their discipline tempered by a newfound respect for human adaptability and courage. Sivara turned to Garrett, her voice soft yet resonant. "You didn't just save me, you saved countless lives today. You showed us all that strength isn't just about power or dominance, it's about trust, sacrifice, and knowing when to shield someone, and when to let them shield you." Garrett felt a lump rise in his throat. Those words, simple yet profound, echoed the truth he had discovered the hard way. Heroism was not measured by accolades or victories alone, but by the willingness to act when it mattered most. Amid the cheers and celebrations of the Allied forces, Garrett and Sivara walked through the plaza, where civilians and soldiers alike began repairing the damage, their movements steady, purposeful, and hopeful. Garrett noticed the subtle ways the alien culture began to shift before his eyes, customs that had been rigid for centuries bending slightly to embrace collaboration, understanding, and unity. He realized that their victory had not only been military, it was cultural, philosophical, and deeply transformative. By acting without hesitation, he had catalyzed change on a scale he could hardly comprehend. As night fell, the twin moons rose above the horizon, casting silver light across the facility. Sivara and Garrett found a quiet terrace overlooking the city, a rare moment away from duty and strategy. She placed a hand on his arm, delicate yet firm, and he felt an electric warmth surge through him. "You changed everything," she whispered, her voice carrying a mixture of gratitude and something deeper, more personal. Garrett met her gaze, understanding that their bond was no longer just forged in war or strategy, it was forged in shared risk, trust, and respect that transcended species, culture, and even time. The stars above twinkled, distant yet intimate, as if bearing witness to their journey. Garrett reflected on how a single act of selflessness, the decision to throw himself into harm's way to protect a stranger, had set off a chain of events that reshaped an entire civilization. He realized that destiny often begins with small, unassuming choices, and that courage could ripple outward in ways impossible to predict. Sivara's presence beside him was a constant reminder that the smallest gestures could create the largest impacts, and that life, despite its chaos and danger, often returned in kind. As the first lights of a new day glimmered on the horizon, Garrett and Sivara stood side by side, looking toward a future filled with possibilities. Their worlds had been forever changed, not by a single weapon or fleet, but by courage, trust, and the unyielding determination to protect one another. Garrett understood, finally, that the act of shielding someone could lead to a destiny far greater than he had ever imagined, and that, in the vast expanse of the galaxy, even a single human could alter the fate of worlds. The stars seemed to shimmer a little brighter that night, as if celebrating the courage that had saved a people, the bond that had united two leaders, and the truth that some choices, no matter how small, can echo across the cosmos forever. Garrett Shaw had shielded a life, and in doing so, had saved a civilization, found an ally, and perhaps discovered a connection that would endure beyond time, war, and the farthest reaches of space.